Number 10. Hank Pym's secret daughter. Nadia Van Dyne is Hank's daughter, who we didn't know existed until 2016. She was introduced in a free comic book day issue about Civil War II. Now of course I like Nadia Van Dyne as a character, don't get me wrong, but her being added in retroactively as Hank's lost daughter was something that I felt like was a bit much. When we learned of Nadia's backstory, we learned that she was the daughter of Hank Pym and his first wife, Maria Travoia. Maria was kidnapped during her and Hank's honeymoon and killed. Nadia ended up being raised in Russia, trained in the Red Room. Eventually she escaped after learning of who her parents really were. By the time she got back to America though to see her father, Nadia learned of his sacrifice to save the world from Ultron and his death as a result. She decided to seek out her stepmother Janet Van Dyne and became close enough to her that she felt compelled to change her own last name to Van Dyne, because that's not confusing at all. She's Hank's daughter, she's not at all related to Janet, and yet she has her last name. Number 9. Falcon's X gene. Remember that time Falcon was revealed to be a mutant and then we explained that origin away with, a faulty sentinel? If you don't, let me explain. In issue 174 of Captain America, we see Professor X meeting Falcon and Cap. Charles implied Falcon's connection to his bird seemed telepathic, and that Falcon's telepathic abilities may be mutant in origin. Falcon himself took this suggestion to heart and even considered what it might mean for him to be a mutant, pondering on his strong, seemingly psychic link to his bird Redwing. He then encountered a sentinel who identified him as a mutant, and so he was a mutant for a time. This was established, and this wouldn't really be revisited or retouched till 2001. Where the idea of Falcon being a mutant was tossed in the trash and explained away as a sentinel simply malfunctioning. Wah wah wah. Number 8. Black Widow's confusing backstory. Natasha being a mysterious spy from Russia who switched sides means that yes, we are going to get a complex backstory for her, but it actually wasn't always that complex. Natasha was inspired to fight for her nation originally when her husband was assumed dead in combat. Her husband wasn't really dead of course, and it was implied that this was all part of a plot to basically encourage her to fight for her country. Before that, Natasha was a renowned ballerina. Later on, however, this whole origin was revealed to be a lie when we learned that the Red Room had embedded memories of her being a ballerina in her mind. They made her think she had trained in ballet, but she hadn't really, because I guess that's what the Red Room does, they mess with you and give you fake memories. Her story was also changed from a woman who was inspired by her husband's sacrifice to put her own life on the line for her country as well, to that of a woman being blackmailed and threatened into becoming a spy in order to protect her husband. Number 7. Professor X married Mystique. Some retcons that are really strange come from film inspiration. As a lot of people discussed in the comments, many feel that Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, for example, would still be mutants today if it wasn't for their being introduced in the MCU's Avengers franchise, which didn't have the rights to include mutants, so we had to kind of unmutant them. I feel as though the case was possibly similar for this weird, secret retcon. In 2013's Uncanny X-Men issue 24, we learned of Mystique and Charles Xavier's secret marriage, meaning that the child we saw Mystique gave birth to while in the guise of Moira McTaggart was likely one willfully conceived, as opposed to Mystique tricking Charles into sleeping with her, which would have been super weird and pretty not good in my opinion. In the X-Men prequel films such as First Class, which came out in 2011, we see a different kind of relationship between Raven and Charles. We get this weird love triangle between Charles, Raven, and Eric, and it seems more of that likely influenced this weird retcon plot point revealed in the comics in Charles's will. Number 6. Thanos. Number 1 dad? Thanos has never really been known as a caring and kind person. Even the people he keeps close to him are never really fully safe from his wrath. Faithful servants, family members, to Thanos, everyone is pretty much disposable. The same could be said for his adopted daughter Gamora, who he hardened and transformed into a killer until she ended up later rebelling. In the 2019 Thanos series, however, we learn how Gamora's relationship with her father was, well, more complex. How he actually, in his own way, was kind of a good father to her. This series also highlights how much they both cared for each other, despite the fact that an Infinity Gauntlet, which happened in the 90s, pre this series, but in terms of continuity would have taken place after this, Thanos seems to not show any regard for his adopted daughter's life. So it's kind of a retcon. Doesn't make a lot of sense. Number 5. Spider-Man's non-sister. So this is kind of another retcon that for me is similar to Nadia's. I like the idea of this character, but the whole story involving her is Well, it's pretty wacky. Teresa showed up in Amazing Spider-Man Family Business claiming to be Teresa Parker, Peter's sister. She believed she was the daughter of Richard and Mary Parker, Peter's parents, and we got a few cool adventures with her, assuming this belief to be true. She was retconned into existence, but honestly, I thought she was kind of a cool retcon to add in, so I was cool with that. However, things got weirder when we learned that the secret sister we'd never heard of till now was all a lie, and that Teresa actually wasn't who she said she was, despite what she herself had been manipulated to believe. It was all a trick, and Mentalo had manipulated Teresa into believing it herself. It was all part of Kingpin's plan to basically lure Peter to a tomb. And we don't actually even know who Teresa's parents are now. It's still a mystery. They even manipulated how Peter saw Teresa, making her appear more like him, so she'd look more like his sister. It's weird. I wish she was actually his sister. That would have been cooler, I think. Number 4. Spider Destiny. Now you know me, I love the Spider-Verse, I love spider totems, but not all fans share my bizarre obsession with the Spider-Verse and Spider-Geddon stories and the villains known as the Inheritors. I swear I'm like the only person that really loves the Inheritors. If you also love them, let me know in the comments. Show yourselves. With these stories came a pretty huge retcon, which basically implied via learning about the Great Web and the spider totems placed within it that every spider, man, or person had a kind of destiny to become that spider person. In other words, Peter Parker didn't have a freak accident, he was actually destined to become Spider-Man. It was fate! Many fans were not a fan of this change to his origins, as they felt it detracted from what makes Peter Parker so appealing, that he's just an average kid who got a freak spider bite that gave him powers, as opposed to it being all ordained. Number 3. Kang. Sometimes we talk about retcons that are ridiculous because they hurt the overall story. Other times there are retcons that feel like they don't really need to happen, and then there are those that just cause more confusion than really necessary. That's sort of the case with Kang. Kang the Conqueror was a villain who was first introduced in Avengers issue 8 in 1964. He is known for being a time-traveling villain who enjoys sitting and floating around while menacing other people. As time went on, however, we'd come to discover, due to the fact that he's a time traveler, the Kang was actually a bunch of other people, including Immortus and even Iron Lad. While these retcons were sometimes interesting, they don't really add much to his story, and at this point Kang being revealed as just about anyone is so old hat, it's kind of lost its shock value as well. Now we're gonna get him in the MCU, I don't know what that's gonna be like. Could be weird, could be great. Number 2. Aunt May's death. Remember when Aunt May died, but it wasn't really Aunt May but an actress who had actually died while impersonating Aunt May? Yeah, that was a weird villainous plot. What we saw in the comics as an elderly Aunt May's death was later retconned into being one of the weirdest and most elaborate plots of Green Goblin's criminal career. It was later revealed that the woman who was dead and buried and who we thought had been Aunt May was actually an elderly actress who happened to be on her deathbed and who had agreed to take on one last role in order to torment Spider-Man? Prove how great of an actress she was? Her motives are pretty foggy. Maybe Green Goblin agreed to pay any surviving relatives of hers a ton of cash? I honestly don't know. What had really happened was this actress had been genetically altered to exactly match Aunt May's genes, meaning no one at the hospital suspected this imposter to be a fake. She died after revealing to Peter that she knew he was Spider-Man, and was even buried in Aunt May's intended plot next to Uncle Ben for a time. That is, of course, until we all learned that Aunt May was really still alive, and this had been some kind of bizarre ruse. Number 1. Clone Saga. I won't deny that in my time on this channel I've come to actually somewhat love elements of the Clone Saga. I originally disliked Clone Saga when I started working here, but I very much have come to appreciate parts of the story and to acknowledge that without Clone Saga, we wouldn't have some very awesome characters like Ben Reilly and Kane Parker. However, one thing I still cannot get over is how long Marvel spent tricking everyone with this story. People spent 20 years thereabouts thinking they were reading Spider-Man, as in Peter Parker, only to find out that all those stories were not his, but actually belonged to a clone. Granted, at least it was a pretty cool clone who we'd all come to love after. But at the time, this was a pretty shocking and frustrating revelation after years of stories, and it left a lot of fans feeling betrayed at the time.
Number 10. Batman's inability to trust. For a superhero with no powers, Batman is able to do remarkably well against much more powerful villains, and is able to stand next to some of the most powerful heroes in the DC universe without looking out of place. And while yes, technically you could count the fact that he's susceptible to being shot or stabbed as a weakness, his greatest weakness is his inability to trust anyone, even his closest allies. Batman is constantly finding himself in situations where he doesn't give his allies the full picture, and as a result, he or his teammates are put in unnecessary danger. The most famous example of this comes from the Tower of Babel storyline, when it was revealed that Batman had developed detailed plans about how to destroy each of his friends and teammates. Ra's al Ghul managed to steal these plans and do a lot of damage to the heroes before Batman realized what was happening. Frankly, it is only through dumb luck that none of the League members were killed in this incident. When the dust settled, the team was furious with Batman for breaching their trust and putting all of them in danger. As the writer of the story, Mark Waid, recently said in an interview where he talked about this arc, Batman's sin to the Justice League was not that he had these plans to counteract each of them. It was that he didn't tell them. If he had just said to Superman, "Listen, just in case you want to know, I have a backup in case you ever go nuts," Superman would go, "Awesome, that's good to hear." This is a lesson that Batman has yet to really absorb, despite the amount of times his secrecy has blown up in his face, such as when he kept the Batman Who Laughs prisoner under the Hall of Justice without telling anyone. Number 9. Zatanna has to be able to speak. Zatanna is a stage magician who happens to be capable of real magic. She is capable of casting powerful enchantments that can range from turning enemies into rabbits or erasing their memories. She casts these spells by saying what she wants backwards. For example, when she wants to turn rain into flowers, she says Niar Semo Keb Suru Wolf. The one limitation on this power is that to cast these spells, she has to be able to speak the incantations. So, unlike other magic-wielding characters like, say, Doctor Strange, who could cast a spell by wordlessly waving their hands, if someone manages to gag Zatanna, she is incapable of doing anything to further defend herself, as happened when she was captured by the Joker, who slit her throat and threw her into a water tank. However, she was eventually able to heal herself by using blood magic and writing the spell backwards in her own blood. Number 8. Daredevil's radar sense gets confused. When Matt Murdock was a young boy, he was hit by a truck that was carrying a radioactive isotope. This isotope got in his eyes and blinded him, but also heightened his other senses, allowing him to develop his trademark radar sense, which helps him navigate the world and fight crime as Daredevil. While this does give him several advantages, it is also prone to being overstimulated by kinda random things. For example, if he ends up underwater, he can easily lose his bearings and have trouble telling up from down. Even worse though is his weakness to rain. This weakness is kinda inconsistent, as in other versions of the character, like the Ben Affleck movie, rain allows him to see things more clearly, but in the comics it is a serious handicap for the character. In issue 25 of the 2011 Daredevil series, Matt is fighting a villain named Ikari who has a similar radar sense. The fight leads them to a sporting goods store where Matt's narration reveals that he has always been worried that a villain will someday think to use a sprinkler system against him, as rain negates his sense of smell, overwhelms his hearing, and makes his radar sense practically useless, cutting his by 95%. Considering how often it seems to rain in Marvel's New York and how dependent Daredevil is on his radar sense, this is a pretty rough weakness.
Number 7. Adam Strange and forced deportation. Who knew that archaeologists could also be superheroes? Well, apparently Adam Strange did, because that is exactly what he is. He inadvertently found himself on the planet Ran and was gifted with all the powers of a superhero in mystery and space, and it's not exactly explained why. Sounds pretty great, right? I mean, what could possibly be his weakness? Well, it's not actually his fault or in his control. This life of bliss he lives on Ran is frequently interrupted by his rather inconvenient transportations back to Earth, where he has no powers at all. The technology responsible for bringing him to Ran, the Zeta Beam, only allows him to remain there for as long as it's transmitting back to Earth. And as it takes the beam a few good years to reach Strange's home planet, it's not exactly easy to catch a ride back. Strange might have been recruited as Rand's savior, but his timing issues really make this role more of a temporary gig. He could be midway through his heroics before vanishing without a single trace. He even left his wife to nearly get eaten by a tiger once. Luckily, as Alan Moore's Swamp Thing series clarified, the Randians are more than capable of looking after themselves when Strange isn't around, and thank goodness for that, because I wouldn't be relying on Strange much either. Give his story a read for yourself, starting with 1986's Outsiders, number 6. Number 6. Human Torch and Asbestos. Now, don't get me wrong, Johnny Storm, aka the Human Torch, is a force to be reckoned with. Not only can he create, absorb, and manipulate fire, which is pretty awesome on its own, but his Nova Flame is hot enough to vaporize the particles of anything in his way, whether it's a bullet, a building, a bad guy, etc. Interestingly enough though, his powers can't seem to penetrate asbestos. Now this doesn't seem like much of a weakness now, given that asbestos is now banned across most of the world, but back when the Human Torch was first created by Stan Lee and Ernest Hart in 1963, it was a much more common thing, as it was used to insulate pipes and wires, soundproof rooms, and even make cheap garden furniture. In Strange Tales number 111, Asbestos Man came into play, dialed up Johnny Storm, and arranged a showdown between the two. The Human Torch wasn't really all that into it, but he agreed nonetheless and showed up completely underprepared. Asbestos Man used his super asbestos suit, a fire retardant shield, and a fisherman's net to go toe to toe with the Human Torch, and he wreaked havoc on the Human Torch until he developed mesothelioma and needed an oxygen tank to stay alive. Moral of the story, kids, is always prepare for anything, and please, don't breathe asbestos. Check out more of the Human Torch's story starting with 1961's Fantastic Four, number 1. Number 5, Wonder Woman and being tied up. Superheroes don't come much more kick than Wonder Woman. She's an extremely skilled warrior with enough power to take on the gods and win, and she's shown time and time again that she can hold her own in the world of comic book heroes. However, the Golden Age Wonder Woman was bound by an interesting Amazonian rule that really did not work in her favor. Known as Aphrodite's Law, it states that when an Amazon girl permits a man to chain her bracelets of submission together, she becomes weak as other women in a man-ruled world. This gender-specific weakness lasted from Wonder Woman's debut in 1942 right through to the mid-80s, when DC finally retconned this out for good. This weakness is less literal than metaphorical, meant to demonstrate Marston's argument that women are only vulnerable to men when they choose to be. But still, I am very glad that this was gotten rid of for good. Check out Wonder Woman more for yourself, starting with her first appearance in 1942's All-Star Comics, Volume 1, Number 8. Number 4, Gladiator and Self-Confidence. Cal-Arc, aka Gladiator, is arguably one of the most powerful comic book heroes ever, gifted with planet-shattering strength, super speed, heat vision, frost breath, and a few psionic abilities as well. He's a superhero anyone would love to be. However, even though he is loved, he never really learned to love himself, and that is sometimes his biggest downfall. Although low self-esteem isn't exactly fun for anyone, trust me, I know, for Gladiator it's actually a fatal weakness. His power fluctuates according to his confidence, as seen in Dan Abnett's and Andy Lanning's War of Kings crossover in 2009. Get him to doubt himself or even his abilities for 1 second and he can be defeated by opponents with far weaker abilities than him. A prime example of this is shown in War of Kings number 3 when Rocket Raccoon manages to convince Gladiator his gun will hurt himself and despite withstanding far worse in the past, succumbs to self-fulfilling prophecy and is beaten. Give his story a read for yourself starting with 1977's X-Men number 107.
Number 3. Domino suffers from electorophobia. Nina Thurman has the mutant ability to subconsciously manipulate probability when she finds herself in stressful or dangerous situations in order to give herself the best possible outcome. In simpler terms, she's extremely lucky. If she is shot at, she will instinctively know exactly the right way to duck and dodge her way past the bullets, or the enemy's gun might simply jam. She can make the highly improbable happen in order to survive almost any situation, and it has made her a very difficult character to defeat, but not impossible. In Deadpool Volume 4, Number 17, the Merc with a Mouth is planning on assassinating one of the X-Men's most vocal critics in order to earn a place on the team. The X-Men of course do not want to be embroiled in this kind of scandal and send Domino to deal with Deadpool. She ties him to a bed and the two talk with Wade confessing that he is terrified of cows and Domino revealing that she is terrified of chickens. You'd think she was kidding or lying, but later in the issue when Deadpool escapes and goes after the target again, Domino and Wolverine chase after him only to be taken out of commission when crawling through an air vent when they end up face to face with a chicken. Domino is paralyzed with fear and unable to continue on, which delays her and Wolverine long enough for Deadpool to get away. Considering how much poultry seems to affect her, Domino is lucky she doesn't come across them more often. Number 2. Mon-El and Lead. One day when Superman was just a young super boy, he looked to the sky and saw a crashing rocket. He intercepted it and discovered a young man inside with a locket from Clark's Kryptonian parents, Jor-El and Lara Lor-Van, wishing him luck on his travels. The young man had suffered amnesia, but the fact that he had the same powers as Superboy led Clark to deduce that this was his long-lost brother from Krypton. He named him Mon-El, and the two began fighting crime together while enjoying their newfound sense of family. However, Superboy soon became suspicious of his new brother, as Krypto didn't seem to recognize him, and his belt was made from a metal not found on Krypton's periodic table. As he did a lot But in the Silver Age, Clark began putting Mon-El through a series of elaborate and convoluted tests to prove he was an imposter. He took a bunch of lead balls and painted them green before throwing them into space. He then went to a nearby planet with Mon-El to play baseball. When the green balls showed up, Superboy pretended they were kryptonite meteors and pretended to be affected. When Mon-El also began acting sick, Clark took this as proof that he was an imposter, but as Mon-El's amnesia wore off, he revealed that he was actually from the planet Daxam and had met Jor-El on his travels. As a Daxamite, he had the same powers as Superboy, but really did have a vulnerability to lead. While a Kryptonian would return to full health when kryptonite was removed, a Daxamite exposed to lead was doomed to a slow and painful death. Superboy was forced to put Mon-El in the Phantom Zone until he could find a cure. Mon-El has had a few adventures since then as a member of the Legion of Superheroes, but the fact that he could be killed by a relatively common element is pretty dumb. Number 1. Aquaman gets dehydrated. As the son of a human and an Atlantean, Arthur Curry is capable of some pretty astounding feats. He is able to survive underwater and swim at incredible speeds. He has super strength and expert fighting skills, as well as the ability to control the oceans when wielding the Trident of Poseidon. Oh, and he can also talk to and control fish, an ability that might seem lame until he attacks you with a megalodon. However, he also has a weakness that is pretty silly. If Aquaman doesn't go back in the water every hour, he begins to grow weak and dehydrated. The severity of this weakness depends on who is writing the comic and what continuity you're in, but the Silver Age version of this character was particularly vulnerable. A great example of this is in Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen number 115, when Jimmy developed the same powers as Aquaman. A villain impersonating Superman was able to trick Aquaman and Jimmy into entering a competition where they stayed out of the water for an hour and then crawled through the desert trying not to die, as the fake Superman taunted them with a pitcher of water. For those wondering, Jimmy won the competition and was made the new king of Atlantis. After they defeated the villain, he ceded the throne back to Aquaman, but the fact that Jimmy beat him in a nefarious but fair competition, and by rights is the true king of Atlantis, makes you realize why Aquaman has so much trouble being taken seriously.
Number 10. Jack of Hearts. Jack of Hearts, whose name is actually Jonathan Hart, so a John instead of a Jack in his everyday life, is an underrated hero really, though he could do with a wardrobe update. His name makes him sound like he belongs in a Las Vegas casino, while his powers have nothing to do with card tricks. He got his powers from a fuel created by his father called Zero Fluid. He was covered in it as a result of a scuffle between him and an evil corporation who wanted to steal his father's scientific discovery. This resulted in him being granted powers including zero energy blast, superhuman strength, durability, and flight. But regardless of how cool he is alone, his costume makes him look like he would fit in more in Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland than the pages of a comic book. He looks like one of the Queen of Hearts goons. With his half-painted face and his card-inspired tunic, his outfit from the 70s is in need of an update. I would love to see his outfit reflect just how cool of a hero he is. Number 9. Black Bolt and Lockjaw. The presence of Black Bolt, Inhuman leader and king, and his dog Lockjaw might shock you for appearing on this list. Why did I add him here? Okay, let's just do a pan up from the bottom of his costume. So everything is good so far. Yep, standard spandex outfit here, cool pattern on the suit, and then wait for it, there. What is that on his mask? That is a tuning fork. It is true that Black Bolt sometimes uses his tuning fork in the comics to emit energy or channel his powers, but he also seems to use his powers just fine without the fork. It isn't a part of his body after all, it's just a part of his costume. Also, Lockjaw also has a tuning fork on his head, which to be fair looks as adorable as it does ridiculous. So you might think, but wait, what does Lockjaw use his tuning fork for? He doesn't have the electron harnessing speech center that Black Bolt possesses, right? You're right. Lockjaw is primarily known for his teleportation powers. The tuning fork for him can be used to channel and focus these powers. For someone who is using their speech, I could kinda see that this tuning fork might make sense, but for Lockjaw's powers, it also helps? Wait, WTF? Is this an Inhuman thing? Cause if so, why isn't everyone wearing a tuning fork on their head? Where's Medusa's tuning fork? Number 8. Captain Ultra. Captain Ultra doesn't just suffer from sometimes being an annoying character who admittedly even other supers would like some distance from, he also suffers from a case of a bad costume. Poor guy. His costume is problematic for the reason that it just has like too much going on. We are first introduced to Captain Ultra in the Fantastic Four Volume 1 issue 177. Another honorable mention from that issue is wannabe supervillain character Osprey, who wears wings despite not having any flight powers. Or any powers at all, sadly. Back to Captain Ultra. From his debut to his short time in the Defender series, his costume in the 60s and 70s always had just too much going on. Green helmet, blue cape, orange pants, red and yellow vest, blue underwear over the top of it all. All the iconic 70s colors rolled into one heinous outfit. Ugh.
Number 7. The Rhino. The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Okay, the Spider-Man almost trilogy with Andrew Garfield. Here we go. So we got to see the introduction to Rhino, played by Paul Giamatti, which is a wild sentence to say aloud. So the popular villain made his debut in Amazing Spider-Man issue 41 back in 1966, and fans were pumped to see this movie possibly lead us to a Sinister Six movie, and it was coming. So this strange gentleman throughout the movie who was assembling this sinister crew asked Alexei to pilot this exosuit. Now at the beginning of this movie, we had seen him trying to hijack an Oscorp van containing vials of plutonium. Now of course this was Spidey's cool first fight scene of the movie, so he took him down with ease, throwing in left hooks and quips, eventually leaving him literally standing there with his pants down. And then at the end of this film, because you know he's only in the opening scene and the ending scene forever, that's all the Rhino we have now until they redo him again, but they're not gonna bring him back for sure. This is a hard character to do, and it didn't really work out in this movie in any way. Yeah, like imagine if he joined Jamie Foxx's Electro coming into the MCU in the next Spider-Man movie. Like if he appeared there, he'd get his ass kicked. Like Mark 1 could take this guy. Now I understand you need to make it again more realistic for a live action movie, but this just wasn't it. Number 6, Apocalypse. X-Men Apocalypse. He made his first full comic book appearance in X-Factor issue 5. He's the big, brooding villain of the Marvel Universe, or one of them at least. And after the success of X-Men Days of Future Past, this movie was hyped up. The first mutant, near omnipotent superpowers, this guy is the big bad we've been waiting for in the X-Men universe. And the results were boring dialogue. The costume ended up looking like the sticky dude from Power Rangers movie. Ivan Ooze. Yeah, Ivan Ooze was the villain. Hi, can I get 4 tickets to X-Men Ivan Ooze? Thanks, debit. To be honest, I'd rather just watch Oscar Isaac act as a person, because it's usually pretty good. Ex Machina was an amazing performance. This movie just felt like a superhero movie with a budget every time I looked at him. And also, the guy's barely in the movie. Like, for the main villain, for Apocalypse in a live-action X-Men film, we got to see him for less than 20 minutes in total. Number 5, The Thing. Fantastic Four. 2015, very important number. The Fantastic Four movies are on here more than once, and for good reason. Okay, so we head over now to the reboot that didn't do well at all. It was directed by Josh Trank, released in 2015, and is currently sitting at a 9% on Rotten Tomatoes. Also, the other Fantastic Four movies before this reboot didn't get the best of reviews. I mean, sure, they were made long before the MCU was established, so there's not much to compare, but they were fun at the time. I mean, I remember having a good time in theaters. I don't remember having a bad time in theaters like I did with this Fantastic Four movie. But with John Watts attached to take a swing at the franchise yet again, we have a little bit of hope. He brought Spider-Man back to life and did such a good job. So as soon as he announced that he was doing Fantastic Four, I think we're good. I think we're finally past the uglies, and now we're gonna get into the goods. But let's look now at one of the many things that made this movie bomb. And for me, it was character design. It didn't work. It didn't pull me in at all. I didn't care about any of these characters. I didn't care about the Fantastic Four. That's insane. Like The Thing, he's a super rock monster with a literal heart of gold. His first appearance is fun. He's a fun major character. Keyword here is fun. In 2011, The Thing ranked 18th in the top 100 comic book heroes, and we still haven't really seen any movie do him justice properly. For starters, at least the version that Michael Chiklis played had an actual actor under the suit. We had an actual human to relate to in some way or another. Number 4, Doctor Doom, Fantastic Four 2015. And now we got number 4, same movie. Let's do it. While we're at it, I gotta bring up Doctor Doom from the same movie. Perhaps even worse than how bad The Thing looked, we have our main villain. Also, one of the biggest Marvel villains ever, of all time. Victor Von Doom was played by Toby Kebbell, who I'm a big fan of. His motion capture work for the Planet of the Apes movies were amazing. He's a fantastic actor. So dare I say, I was looking forward to seeing this movie in theaters. In the early 2000s franchise, we almost got him. We almost got Doctor Doom. We kind of got a comic book look and feel. A little bit. But even so, this was a watered down version of the character as a whole. Like, he's not a king yet. And the reboot back in 2015, when the first look of Doctor Doom was leaked, we couldn't even believe it. We thought it was fake. We were confused and kind of worried, but then, you know, maybe a little CGI will kind of clean him up a bit, maybe some post-production. Maybe we'll have a good Doctor Doom, right? Right? We'll get him next time, boys.
Number 3, Thor. And back to The Crossing we go. Sorry friends, I obviously need to make a top 10 worst superhero costumes from The Crossing list. If you want me to delve more into this comic book event for awful looks, let me know in the comments. Or if you want to just delve more into massive events like The Crossing in terms of comic lore. During this event, everyone looked awful, but I am not sure if there was anyone worse than Thor. If you thought the flowing locks we see in the MCU on Thor were a bit much, you're gonna love this. His hair was drawn long enough to look like it could just reach past his butt. He is covered in random leather straps, they don't seem to be useful for anything. He's also covered in metal spikes, and Mjolnir for some reason has a chain hanging from it. He is also basically wearing a green crop top. Yep. Number 2. Star Sapphire. A lot of Star Sapphire's outfits have been known for their revealing nature. The sometimes villain, sometimes hero is one of Hal's exes and comes to us from the Pink Lanterns, who stand for love. So it kinda makes sense that they would often prefer to, show off some skin. But there is showing off some skin, and then there is showing off some skin and, breaking the laws of physics. The outfit I'm referring to is one that is a mystery when it comes to how it stayed on. This outfit involves full arm coverage and a very large collar, but about nothing else. Her abdomen is exposed, and who knows how that costume manages to give her enough support in the chest area. It certainly is a strange leotard, which also comes with a headdress that wraps onto her cheeks for that extra coverage. You know how it is. Sins of Star Sapphire? Oh, that costume was a sin. Number 1. Wonder Man. Which costume does one even pick for Wonder Man? They are all terrible. The one of the worst in my mind is when he simply wore a red blazer and sunglasses as a costume, like over a black t-shirt and jeans. Oh, and don't forget that gold chain. Wow. This look comes to us from the Mighty Avengers series, but there have been countless other gaudy appearances from Wonder Man, including his West Coast Avengers look, and let's not forget all the pouches he was given during the 90s in his self-titled series. What is it with pouches? Like, you're a superhero fighting crime, like what do you need to keep in there? Your keys? Some band-aids? Chapstick? Why do people have so many pouches in the 90s?
And at number 10, Puck's Constant Pain. Puck is a character who was first introduced into Marvel Comics back in 1983's Alpha Flight issue 1. He's a 3'6" superhero named Eugene Judd, who initially when created had no superpowers at all. He was just exceptionally acrobatic and incredibly skilled at combat, and was always armed with a good sense of humor. To make things more interesting though, the character suffered from constant pain thanks to a condition called achondroplasia, which often is correlated with dwarfism. But as time went on, Puck's origins were retconned, and when Bill Mantlo took over Alpha Flight, he decided to give a new meaning to Puck's aching. The retcon made it so that his small stature was due to a mystical influence. Puck once upon a time was 7 feet tall according to this retcon, an adventurer who stumbled upon something called the Black Blade of Baghdad, which contained the spirit of an evil sorcerer named Razar. Judd accidentally freed him, but trapped him using some sort of ancient mysticism, which basically put Razar inside of his own body, trapped for an eternity, causing him non-stop pain that eventually caused him to shrink down physically, but also made him immortal. So, he went from regular guy to someone walking around as a living prison for a mystical evil sorcerer. Yeah, that seems like it makes the most sense, doesn't it? And at number 9, Zorn was Magneto all along. But he was also Zorn again. In 2001, Marvel brought in Grant Morrison to reinvent the X-Men, and amongst the many new aspects he introduced, he also introduced a highly controversial character named Zorn. Why was Zorn controversial? Well, initially he was a Chinese mutant who wore a skull mask that found his way out of prison and into Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, where he worked as a teacher. At the end of Morrison's run, he revealed that Zorn was in fact Magneto all along, who prior was presumed to have been dead. Zornito, as I will call him for the rest of this list, went on a massacre in New York and ended up getting into a full-on brawl with the X-Men and was killed off again, all as some beaten to death metaphor to symbolize the end of an era. After Morrison left, Marvel retconned the storyline, revealing that this Zornito was actually just a Magneto imposter himself, and that the real Magneto was alive and innocent. Eventually, they introduced a second Zorn, who was a twin to the original Zorn, and instead of having a star where his head should be, hence the mask, he had a black hole where his head should be. Look, they're different. And to make matters worse, there was no actual connection between Zorn and Magneto for any of this to be justified. It's noted in the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, X-Men 2005, that this happened all thanks to Scarlet Witch meddling with reality prior to the House of M event. Confused? Yeah, most people still are when it comes to this retcon too. What did Magneto ever do to get dragged into this crap? And at number 8, Scarlet Witch's kids. I feel like the only sacred thing when it comes to Wanda Maximoff's family life is that she is a twin and that her brother is Quicksilver. Seriously, don't even get us started on the whole Magneto isn't actually her father debacle. So let's try to not make this confusing. Wanda Saga, aka Scarlet Witch, once upon a time had twin sons named Wiccan and Speed. They became members of the Young Avengers. Vision was their father. Yes, he's a robot, but we'll get to that in a moment. So Wanda believed she had these two children with Vision until it was revealed that they were actually created by her reality warping abilities. Makes sense, cause you know, Vision is a robot. Anywho, it just gets worse from there. Wiccan and Speed are apparently made from two pieces of Mephisto's soul, who then tried to reabsorb those pieces, which then reincarnated Wiccan and Speed into Billy Kaplan and Thomas Shepard. The whole thing is just very confusing. Moral of the story? Hide your kids? And at number 7, Jean Grey was never Phoenix. The Phoenix Saga, and Jean Grey by association, is perhaps one of the most iconic and recognized X-Men stories to date, and according to this retcon, it's also pretty meaningless. You all likely know the story. Jean is possessed by the Phoenix Force, a powerful cosmic entity that consumes her and ends up getting a bunch of people killed, including herself. By the end of this year, there will officially be 2 live-action movies that have followed that storyline. After Scott attempted to move on by shacking up with the literal clone of Jean Grey, Madeline Pryor, it was revealed that, surprise, Jean was actually alive. The Phoenix Force had apparently preserved her body in an underwater cocoon. But then, it turned out that she wasn't the Phoenix at all. And then Jean just kept dying and coming back and dying and coming back, and who knows what's what anymore. So yeah, Jean's big sacrifice in killing herself in order to prevent the Dark Phoenix from destroying the entire universe is kind of pointless. Sorry guys. Some serious nihilism going on over at Marvel, I suppose. They just keep wanting to end the universe and then like, psych, it's not gonna end, but I guess, you know, that's comics. And at number 6, the Spider God. What's one way to piss fans off? Retcon an origin story that's over half a century old, and toss in a terrifyingly large and powerful spider into the mix while you're at it. Obviously, we are talking about Spider-Man here. In the controversial Spider-Man The Other story arc, it's revealed that Peter Parker was actually chosen by a spider god to become the web-slinging hero, which, yes, in case you're wondering, makes zero sense. Thanks to J. Michael Straczynski, the spider god, a totemic god, quietly manipulated Peter's actions and went on to give him new powers as well, which allowed him to communicate with arthropods, have a poisonous bite, and, get this, wrist stingers. Best part was, this was never mentioned again, ever. Fans hated it, and it's also one of the reasons that our next retcon on our list was brought into the fray. And at number 5, Spider-Man One More Day. Yet another wonderful retcon thanks to J. Michael Straczynski here, and Joe Quesada. So the One Day More story arc is the famous controversial story arc in which after Peter's identity is revealed publicly, Aunt May ends up getting fatally injured. In order to save her, Peter strikes up a deal with Mephisto, one of Marvel's best narrative tools when it comes to retcons, who agrees to let Aunt May live if Peter gives up his life with Mary Jane Watson. Peter does it, dissolving their marriage. It's the product of that lame cliche that superheroes don't deserve to be happily married. Anywho, the decision cost Peter his future daughter, who he got a glimpse of throughout. But it reset a lot of aspects of Parker's life, and involved a terrifying demon in order to do so. It's stupid and scary. And at number 4, Sentry. Sentry's story is a little terrifying. Sentry's story starts off with the alias of the character, a man named Robert, remembering that he was once a superhero. He realizes that no one else remembers him being an active superhero, and the deeper the narrative dives, the more we learn about this life that Robert, aka Sentry, had in the Marvel Universe. Turns out, Sentry has an evil other half living within him. That, with the scope of the powers that he has, was a supreme threat to the Marvel Universe. So Sentry, with the help of Reed Richards, ended up having everyone on Earth's memory of him erased, including his own. Essentially, his whole story was a massive retcon in order to introduce a character and squeeze him into previous storylines that had already existed in Marvel's history. It's one of the less painful retcons on this list, since it is doing something interesting with the narrative, but perhaps the scariest part of Sentry's entire story is how horrifying his other half, Void, truly is, and why he would go to those lengths to forever suppress him. And at number 3, Karen Page. Are you guys familiar with Women in Refrigerators? It was a website started back in 1999 by author Gail Simone that highlighted all of the ways that female characters had been mistreated in comics. It had become a trope. The female characters were often used to progress a male character's narrative, and were subject to brutal murders, intense injuries, rape, or were just flat out depowered. Anywho, the exact concept can be applied to this ridiculous retcon surrounding Daredevil's lady pal Karen Page. Karen was given some pretty crappy treatment. She was made into a prostitute, was given AIDS, which turns out was all an illusion thanks to Mysterio, and then died in Matt Murdock's arms after Bullseye killed her. All in all, Karen was retconned from a character who went to California and began a successful acting career to a character who became addicted to heroin and starred in pornos. From Daredevil issue 227 onwards, it just gets worse and worse for Karen. Poor girl. And at number 2, Hydra Cap. Hydra Cap is the most recent retcon on this list. So in 2017, there was a series called Captain America Steve Rogers that set the foundation for some major reveals concerning Steve Rogers' origin story. We learn that he had been a sleeper agent all along for Hydra, and was basically a Nazi who stood against everything the character ever stood for. It was ludicrous. He ends up starting this whole war with him working with Hydra for global dominance, and it's later revealed that it wasn't actually Steve Rogers. Instead, the culprit behind this was an alternate timeline Hydra duplicate of Rogers. But considering the political climate that the series was released during, needless to say, making the epitome of American patriotism a fascist was a little on the nose there, Marvel. And finally, in at number 1, Gwen Stacy and Norman Osborn got it on. This one is actually really terrible. It seems like poor Peter Parker gets the worst of the retcons, doesn't he? Or maybe they're just all penned by J. Michael Straczynski and that's why they all suck. Might be that. This retcon in the story arc since past added a lot of unnecessary details and motivation behind the events of the famous 1973 The Amazing Spider-Man, the night Gwen Stacy died storyline. After a pair of twins attack Spider-Man, Peter later finds out that they're actually Gwen Stacy's children, who are out to kill Peter for revenge. MJ would break the news to Peter, telling her that Stacy had confided in her. Stacy slept with Norman Osborn and gave birth to his twin children in France shortly before she died. The reason why Osborn went after her that night was because she was a threat to his potential heirs, because she wanted to raise his children with Peter instead. He was going after both Peter and Gwen that night. Still, the panels in which we see Osborn get freaky with Gwen are, well, not great. They kind of burn themselves into your retinas. Sorry, I am so sorry.
Number 10, Martian Manhunter and Fire. Now I'm not gonna lie, I am also not the biggest fan of fire either, and I would absolutely hate being set on fire for so many reasons. But for such a powerful hero who can shapeshift at a molecular level, change his entire genetic makeup to let him pass through solid objects, withstand ferocious attacks, or bend light waves around his body, it just seems a little silly, right? Not to mention that he comes from Mars, otherwise known as the Red Planet or the Fire Star. So why is this one of his biggest weaknesses? Well, long before Martian Manhunter even existed, a race of aliens known as the Burning caused some serious damage with fire in order to create their offspring, which, needless to say, people weren't too happy about. After the Guardians of the Universe separated the offspring into the White Martians and the Green Martians, they were all imbued with a congenital pyrophobia, aka a fear of fire. So it kind of makes sense why he's so afraid of it. Not only does it physically hurt him, but it also scrambles his most prized weapon of all, his mind. This fear and weakness is so intense that when he's exposed to flame, he has the capacity to self-destruct, either combusting into bits or dissolving into rivers of Martian liquid. Want to know more about the Martian Manhunter? Well then check him out in his first appearance in 1986's Justice League of America, number 255. Number 9, The Flash and Being Too Fast. At first, I've gotta say this one confused me so much because that's kind of the Flash's whole thing, right? Well, when it comes to Barry Allen, his speed might be his greatest strength, but being too fast puts his life in mortal danger. In Crisis on Infinite Earths, we see the Flash use his super speed to thwart the Anti-Monitor's evil plan, but the speed vortex he creates to stop the villain's antimatter cannon from firing is so fast that it sweeps the Flash away along with it. He ends up being stranded for 23 years in the Speed Force, you know, that mystical energy field that gives all the speedsters their powers, and spends that whole time running and trying to figure out how to get back. Basically, what happened is that Barry ran way too fast for his body to handle and he atomized himself. Thought to be dead by his closest friends, including Wally West, who took up the Flash mantle in his absence, Barry's apparent death was a huge shock for everyone, and also entirely his own fault. Check out more of The Flash for yourself, starting with his first appearance in 1956's Showcase, number 4. Number 8, Power Girl and Raw Materials. You'd think that being weak to kryptonite would be their only weakness, considering how easy it seemed for people to get their hands on it. But Kara Zor-El from Earth 2 actually had another pretty big weakness at one point. They were vulnerable to unprocessed natural materials such as branches and rocks for a short while. This also includes stone, dirt, and sand. Basically anything that can be found on Earth that isn't man-made. In Peter David's Supergirl Volume 4 number 16, she gets knocked to the ground and impaled by a pretty big tree branch, which in her defense would put anyone on the ground. Supergirl helps yank out the branch, and with this weirdly sociopathic smile on her face, she asked, "What, are you vulnerable to wood?" It took a second, but after she was no longer in pain, she replied, "Worse, to any raw, unprocessed natural materials. So, sticks and stones really can break my bones." God, dumb joke and even dumber weakness. Check her out for yourself in her first appearance in 2011's Flashpoint Volume 2, number 5.
Number 7, Wonder Woman. One of Wonder Woman's original weaknesses seems to be in line with what she represents as a character: female power and strength. As an Amazon, Wonder Woman was initially also susceptible to losing her strength and power if she was ever restrained by a man. While some might see this as kind of a sexist weakness in the comics, I would actually see it as kind of being the opposite. To me, it's more meant to symbolize symbolize a history of oppression against women and its consequences. At least that's how I see that weakness. However, regardless of any greater meaning behind it, it was also a pretty silly weakness in the sense that it made Wonder Woman fairly easy to defeat under certain circumstances, and if she was going up against men, because if they just found her bracelets, that's kinda it. So I do have to say I'm glad this is no longer a rule for her in the comics today. Number 6. Nightcrawler. Well, Nightcrawler is a super powerful character overall, and an iconic and amazing character as well. He isn't actually the most powerful teleporter. This has to do with his weird restrictions and weaknesses surrounding teleportation. The big one being that he can only teleport by a max distance of about, I believe, 2 miles at a time. The other main one being the more that he teleports, the more exhausted he gets, and Kurt as a teleporter can tire fairly quickly if he's forced to make multiple jumps, which if he has to go far, he kind of has to do because each jump he can only go so far. Kurt does teleport through the Brimstone dimension, which I saw some people in the comics bringing up as like a super powerful thing, but this is actually more how his teleportation skills work. It's not necessarily something he's choosing to do, as he has to travel through the Brimstone dimension to get where he's going. So while yes, he can travel interdimensionally, it's only one dimension, and it's not really by choice, it's more by design. However, Kurt is an amazing character because of his limitations. That's what makes him so great. It means that when Kurt has to push it to save the day, and he often of course does just that because he really is a hero, he's often putting his life on the line for ideals he believes in, or for all of Earth or all of life itself, whatever he's defending. That's why we love Kurt. Number 5. Green Lantern. Hal Jordan is Green Lantern, or one of the Green Lanterns anyways, and as a Green Lantern he has a pretty iconic and ridiculous weakness. Or at least for a very long time in the comics he did have that weakness. Hal had a weakness to the color yellow. In fact, all Green Lanterns did for a while. This was as a result of parallax existing within the Green Lantern Corps' central battery. Having the entity of fear within the battery caused all Green Lanterns to develop a weakness to yellow, something that was used in All-Star Batman and Robin and Frank Miller's alternate reality to weaken and torment Hal Jordan's Green Lantern. In the All-Star Batman and Robin comic, Batman and Robin basically paint themselves and an entire safe house yellow, just to teach Hal a lesson about meddling in Batman's affairs. Number 4. Black Cat. Black Cat is an anti-hero over at Marvel Comics, who is generally known for being an ally and sometimes romantic partner of Spider-Man. While she typically is shown as being a skilled thief with acrobatic skills and superb training and experience as a fighter, at least that's how she was depicted initially, she doesn't usually have any superpowers to speak of. However, at one point, she did just have straight up powers, and this happened for Black Cat when the Kingpin granted her wish of getting them. However, because this was the Kingpin, it of course did not work out exactly as Felicia had planned. She ended up with bad luck powers, which were extremely useful when fighting an enemy, but not so useful when with an ally or anyone else, as they actually affected not just her opponents, but like anyone who was close to her, which means that Peter suffered from them as well. To make matters worse, Felicia kept her powers a secret from him, which ended up driving a wedge between the two when it came to their romantic and working relationships with one another.
Number 3. Daredevil and loud noises. Now we all likely know this, but Matt Murdock's loss of vision took away the natural gift of eyesight that we all take for granted, and replaced it with echolocation, an uncanny radar sense that allows him to basically see things through sound. Unfortunately for many heroes, their greatest strength can also be their greatest weakness, and such is the case for Daredevil, as his extreme sensitivity to sound can completely incapacitate him. In Daredevil Volume 2 West Case Scenario, he is subjected to a high decibel ultrasound, 120 decibels to be exact, by the dastardly Purple Man, who knows his weapon is excruciating for a man of Daredevil's gift. Daredevil's head spins and he looks like a man under a sorcerer's spell, leaving him completely vulnerable to a follow-up attack. The same can actually be done using intense smells as well, since his sense of smell was also heightened after losing his eyesight. Although Daredevil can and does go toe-to-toe with pretty much anyone in a fight, he will get utterly emasculated by a stink bomb or a supersonic sound. Check out more of Matt Murdock for yourself, starting with his first appearance in 1964's Daredevil number 1. Loud noises! Number 2. Green Lantern and wood. If you're a bit confused, that is totally okay. This is not a weakness that is common across all of the Green Lanterns, it's specific to the very first Green Lantern, Alan Scott. Despite being armed with a magical ring and a spectrum of pretty much limitless powers, Scott seemed to have another fatal weakness other than the color yellow. He first realized that this might be a problem for him after he was hit in the face with a wooden log, and then after a series of wins and victory laps, Scott realized tree bark might be his potential undoing. Put a little more succinctly, items made of wood cannot be lifted or broken by energy from the ring, nor can barriers of emerald energy stop projectiles crafted from wood. Apparently this vulnerability to wood was because the green flame was an incarnation of green growing things, and thus could not be turned against them. Guess you could say he, can't get wood. Check out the first Green Lantern for yourself, starting with 1940s All-American Comics, number 16. Number 1. Captain Marvel Jr. and his own name. Poor Freddie Freeman. Out of all of the weaknesses on this list today, he probably drew the shortest straw because his weakness is his own name. If Captain Marvel Jr. tries to introduce himself to a superpowered ally, or for some reason feels the need to say his name in the middle of a battle, he'll instantly be transformed back into Freddie Freeman, a ordinary young lad who relies on a crutch to walk. Or if he speaks his superhero alias aloud in the guise of Freddie Freeman, he'll transform into a shimmering beacon of muscly justice and give himself away. Jerry Ordway tried getting around this flaw during Captain Marvel Jr.'s sporadic appearances in Teen Titans between 1995 and 1998 by having Freeman refer to himself as CM3, since he was one of the 3 members of the Captain Marvel family at the time. Also, he could avoid accidental transformations, but that change didn't really stick around. Honestly, for someone who inspired many of Elvis's onstage looks, that is one weakness that I don't know if I can overlook. Check him out for yourself in his first DC appearance in 1995's The Power of Shazam, number 3.
Number 10, Daredevil. While Daredevil is an incredible fighter and ass kicker, his alter ego Matt Murdock is a lawyer. If Matt were to do anything other than sit on the sidelines, people would seriously take note of a blind man kicking ass in the streets of New York. Everyone knows Matt Murdock is blind, but people don't know that Daredevil is. However, if someone were to make the connection, if Matt were to bust out some moves against a gang in Hell's Kitchen, then the Scarlet Swashbuckler's day might be ruined. Matt Murdock, for both his own sake and his superhero identity's sake, must just get beaten down if anyone wants a piece. So he's useless. Just like a vegan in a gelatin factory? I don't know what I'm saying, honestly. Number 9, Shazam. Shazam was incredibly popular back in the 1940s, with issues even outselling Superman. And while the Shazam movie was one of the better DCEU movies, the only one, Billy Batson is Shazam's alter ego, and he's literally a 14-year-old kid who, unless he says that magic word, is literally just that, a 14-year-old kid. And unless he says Shazam, he's not in costume, therefore he is very much allowed to be on this list. What can a kid do in a fight? It's like that saying, would you rather fight 100 kid-sized Shazams or one Shazam-sized kid? Honestly, even if he is Shazam-sized, the teen is still going to be easier to fight than Shazam, especially for me, where my only superpower is being able to clear out a room with one single cut of cheese. Number 8, Green Lantern. While in costume, Hal Jordan is the protector of Earth, a man with the superpower of not eating that last donut even though he really wants it. While yes, Green Lantern has gotten some hate and at points definitely deserved it, his alter ego is nothing more than a test pilot. Without the ring, what could Hal Jordan do realistically? Fly the superheroes who can't already fly into battle, unless someone who can fly is bringing them. Green Lantern has done some pretty incredible things so far, even at one point trying to arrest God. No matter how ridiculous that sounds, it happened. If you're not Green Lantern, it's a red light for helping Hal. Sorry, not sorry. Man, these jokes are terrible.
Number 7, Invisible Woman. After choosing to merge with Malice's persona to prevent Malice from taking control over her own body, Sue Storm underwent a radical change in the comics. While I kind of enjoyed the verve, sassiness, and occasional short temper she exhibited, including a scene in the comics where she turns residents of the tower's clothes invisible, using her powers in an attempt to cause them to stop chastising her and criticizing her younger brother Johnny Storm, which was pretty comical. A change that also came about from her transformation was one that was pretty ridiculous. Her ditching her old uniform and creating a new one with a cutout 4 in its chest to show off cleavage, and a ridiculous tummy window. This leotard is certainly an outfit, but one that seems a little risky. I mean, I know she's the Invisible Woman, but even when invisible, exposing your stomach to an enemy just seems like a bad call. Number 6, Hercules. Obviously, Hercules is from an ancient era, and as a result, his looks can be considered dated to some, or I really think of them more as classic looks, and I find them more timeless myself. Except for during the Crossing event. Get ready to open up the Pandora's box that is time in Marvel comic history, cause there are a lot of awful outfits that came out of here. This Hercules costume involved a tank top with the Avengers A on it, some brown pants, and a belt. With his tank top tucked in and belted, I mean, just imagine that look in the real world, like outside of the comics, and it's utterly ridiculous. Not to mention, they had Hercules shave for this outfit. This modern take on Hercules in the world of the 90s was just a travesty to his character, who is known for his iconic gladiator-inspired looks. I also have to give an honorable mention to the time Hercules' costume was just his birthday suit. Yep, it was super short-lived, and to call it a costume per se might be a stretch, but he was sort of training others using a Greek-inspired athletics competition while he was wearing it, or wearing nothing. Even offering to wrestle other heroes while in the buff. Ugh. Number 5. War Machine. We are staying put in the Crossing event for this one as well. If you are unfamiliar with this event in Marvel history, it involved a storyline where our superheroes went up against Iron Man. For a hero who is so celebrated, Tony Stark certainly does get battled by his fellow heroes more than you'd think. In this story, Tony is revealed to have been working for Kang for years, which results in the heroes having to team up to stop him. The end result is an older Tony Stark being converted back to good and sacrificing himself so that younger Tony from his past, who is also fighting him, can take over as the Tony of the present. Yeah, it's a confusing one. Anyways, as a result of Tony being evil, Rhodey looks to distance himself from Iron Man, which means him getting a new suit, which looks a bit like a group of, like space bubbles. Also, what is wrong with his helmet? Why is it so round and small? Like, what happened to the shape of James's head? Number 4. Stay gold, Iron Man. Before we had the amazing suits that belong to Tony Stark today, I mean, we could make a few lists based on the best of Iron Man suits if we haven't already. We had the original Avengers version of Iron Man. You may remember this suit from the Iron Man origin story in the MCU, but it looked even less cool and a lot more Tin Man in the Avenger Volume 1 series. So much so that when Iron Man went to save people with it, they didn't even like the look of it. But Tony Stark had a plan to fix this. Update the suit, build a new one, get some cooler gadgets? Nope, nope, and nope. His plan was to paint it gold. And the weird thing is that it worked. Granted, this costume only lasted for a short time in the comics before Tony did end up creating a new suit, but still, it is astonishing that this gold version of his Mark I eyesore somehow made it exponentially better to anyone who saw it painted gold. What?
Number 3. Doorman. This character is honestly pretty useless in costume and out. Doorman is DeMar Davis, and his power is to create a doorway using his body. Using powers from the Dark Force dimension to do so, he can stand in front of any wall with a room on the other side, and boom, there's a one-way door. This can be useful for surprise attacks, yes, but when does that really happen? Stories typically involve heroes losing the element of surprise. But either way, all he can do in costume is create doors. Sure, he can do it out of costume, but when will that be useful? His other aliases include DM, honestly, which makes me think of Dungeon Master, Man of Doors, which makes me think of Men of Letters, and the Living Portal. Living Portal? He can only create a doorway to one room, and it has to be next door. And calling him Doorman just sounds like he's Esteban Julio Ricardo de la Rosa Ramirez. I wonder if there's any relation to Rene Ramirez. Sweet Life of Zack and Cody actually takes place in the DC universe? I gotta get working on that theory. Number 2. Cyborg. Can I count cyborgic? Is that a word? If Cyborg were to have the metal and cyborgic, it's a word now, parts removed from his body, he would be dead. And is there anything more useless than being dead? We can even see what he's like without his armor in Forever Evil number 3, where Batman and Catwoman need to bring Victor to Star Labs to have his father save his life again, because without his costume, he's literally dead weight. He just causes an inconvenience to those around him trying to save his life. This is the only character on the list who would die out of costume. I know you may not consider his cybernetic implants to be a costume, but I do, since that's what makes him a superhero rather than him just being Victor Stone. Number 1. Hindsight Lad. Carlton Lafroig is a great guy to have around if you want to spend your days filled with regret, sadness, and feeling like all around crap. First introduced in Marvel's New Warriors Annual number 3, Carlton would not become Hindsight Lad until New Warriors 37, where he caught a classmate transforming into his alter ego Speedball. Carlton blackmailed Speedball into letting him join the New Warriors. His issue is that he has no powers whatsoever, so while being useless and just kind of a dick out of costume, he's even worse in costume. His power is to point out tactical issues the heroes made in battle after the battle is ended, which means he is useless on the field, so he mostly works a desk job doing administrative tasks and using his computer skills. But can we talk about his costume? I would want to be out of that thing. He has car mirrors on his helmet, for fuck's sakes. This kid is the most sorry excuse for a hero I've ever seen. This kid is the epitome of uselessness. And look at me, I sound like everyone from high school.
Number 10. Spider-Man. Spider-Man is generally known for being one of the most powerful and most iconic heroes out there, but even he has his weaknesses. In fact, while many of them are not as famous as he is, some of them are pretty ridiculous, including his weakness to ethyl chloride, something that also slows and weakens spiders in the natural world. So if you were ever wondering if there might be a bug spray that you could use to fight against Spider-Man, the answer is actually kinda yes. Although make sure you bring a big spray can of ethyl chloride, as he is a lot bigger than your average spider. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you are loving what we are doing here at Top 10 Nerd, why not hit that subscribe button? It really helps us out and you get more of our content, so yay! Number 9. Superman. Superman is a character that we generally associate with strength, but not often weakness, which is interesting considering that he actually has quite a few weaknesses, probably the weirdest among them being magic. The best way to defeat Superman would simply be to become a magic user, because against them he becomes kinda powerless. When it comes to the explanation for why, a lot of people's theories surrounding this have to do with the fact that Superman's powers are naturally occurring, not magic based themselves, although this is usually used as a means to weaken him in the comics, as he doesn't have a natural means to defend against magic, and it's one of the few things like kryptonite that his invulnerability does not protect him from. In fact, narratively speaking, this is likely why he was made weak to magic to begin with, to help give him more to struggle against as a character, as he's kinda OP usually. Number 8. Rogue. Rogue was one of my favorite characters growing up, and I think what I loved about her so much was the tragedy of her story and her powers. But what's even more, I love the way that Rogue overcame them. Still, this would be a terrible weakness to have, or have had, so that's why I'm including Rogue on our list. Rogue's powers allow her to adopt the powers of whoever she comes into physical contact with, actually taking their powers for herself, basically draining them. But that's not all Rogue takes with her touch. She can also take your memories and drain your life force. Or at least, you know, she could do that. Rogue has since overcome this weakness by facing her fears. As it turns out, it was her own subconscious that was basically making it manifest.
Number 7. Black Canary if she gets a sore throat. Dinah Lance is the second hero to use the alias of Black Canary, with her mother being the first. While her mother was limited to being a capable hand-to-hand fighter and being able to train canaries to do amazing feats, her daughter has the ability to unleash the powerful canary cry. How she manages this varies depending on the continuity, with it sometimes being a byproduct of a wizard's curse, and sometimes being due to her carrying the metahuman gene. But what the power does remains consistent. The canary cry allows Dinah to control her vocal cords to generate a powerful sonic attack that can deafen her opponents, and when she really lets loose, can destroy metal and even kill people. However, she needs to be in good vocal health to achieve this, and if she ever has laryngitis, she is unable to unleash the canary cry. However, even without the cry, she is one of the best martial artists in the DC universe, so she still manages okay. Number 6. Wolverine's metal skeleton. Wolverine has always been a powerful mutant sporting claws and a healing factor that makes him practically unkillable. Between that and his super acute senses, his more than a century of combat training, and his berserker rage, he is not someone you want as an enemy. These abilities got an upgrade when the Weapon X program got a hold of him and coated his skeleton and claws with an indestructible metal called adamantium. While this does make him even more durable, it does come with certain drawbacks. For example, it does make it much more difficult for Wolverine to swim, and foes often take advantage of this, trapping the clawed Canadian underwater and making him experience the feeling of drowning until he manages to escape. The other drawback to this, of course, is that it makes him vulnerable to magnetism. While this wouldn't be too bad of a weakness for most heroes, I mean, how often do you really come across a giant magnet in the world? Wolverine has the misfortune of being a member of the one superhero team that is constantly fighting against a character who is able to manipulate metal with his mind. At best, this makes him immobile for most of the encounters against Magneto, and at worst, it results in him getting his skeleton torn out. Number 5. Snowbird can't leave Canada. When the Inuit goddess of the Northern Lights, Nelvana, needed an agent on Earth to help prevent the return of the evil mystical great beasts, she mated with a human and had the shaman, Michael Two Young Men, use his magic to help deliver the child on Earth. Naria was given a decent grab bag of powers, the most notable of which is the ability to transform into any creature found in the Canadian Arctic. She has used this power to become owls, bears, and even whales, which makes her a formidable force against her enemies. However, due to Shaman not being specific enough when casting the spell that bound her spirit to the land, she is somewhat limited in where she can go. If Snowbird goes or is taken beyond the Canadian borders, she grows weak and sick. The longer she is out of Canada, the weaker she gets, and if she stays out of the country too long, she could even die. This weakness was discovered in Alpha Flight number 12 when the team learned that their leader, Guardian, had walked into a trap set by the evil Omega Flight in New York and teleported to his location to try and save him. Snowbird immediately became emaciated and old and nearly died, and was therefore more of a hindrance than a help in this scenario. Snowbird died in a later comic and was eventually brought back, and as a result, this weakness seems to have disappeared, as she has since traveled outside of Canada and has even left the planet without any ill effects. Number 4. Martian Manhunter and his addiction. John Jones is an alien from the planet Mars who has insanely strong telepathic powers that allow him to read and control minds. He also has super strength and the ability to shapeshift, and the ability to become intangible and phase through objects, making him a very difficult hero to defeat. For many years, Martian Manhunter had a psychosomatic weakness to fire that would cause him to lose the use of his powers and be burned. This weakness is kind of a problem when you consider how many superhero battles result in buildings or cars catching on fire, but what I want to focus on is a lesser known weakness, his cookie addiction. In Martian Manhunter Volume 2, number 24, we learn that John has developed an intense love of Choco's cookies, the DC equivalent to Oreos. When Blue Beetle and Booster Gold decide to play a prank on him by stealing his cookies and buying all the Chocos in a mile radius, we learn that when Martian Manhunter goes too long without his fix, he becomes a mindless Hulk-like creature who angrily smashes up the city, screaming about how he needs his cookies. His rampage isn't stopped until Booster Gold and Blue Beetle lead him to a warehouse full of Chocos where he greedily begins to devour them. Once Manhunter is back to normal, Batman discovers that the chemicals in Chocos, though relatively harmless to human biology, are extremely addictive to Martian physiologies. So yeah, fire is a bad weakness, but a cookie dependency issue is way worse.
Number 2. Iska the Unbeaten. Iska is a super interesting character. On one hand, she's extremely powerful and can never lose. She can even potentially have her power utilized to manipulate the stakes of other competitions that she's pulled into. However, this also implies that there are times when she has zero control over her powers, in the sense that she cannot influence the result of an unbalanced battle. In fact, her powers will pull her to serve the side that will be victorious, regardless of whether or not she wants to, in terms of what her mind or her heart is saying to her. This has meant that Iska has been forced to turn her back on her own people, the mutants of Arakko, more than once. She has also had to fight against family, colleagues, and friends before as a result. Although the one thing she can control at times is kind of how she approaches the fighting part of, the battle. Meaning that if she has the option, she can try to fight others involved as opposed to those that she is specifically close to. Like during her fight against planet Arakko and the Great Ring, when she was teleported away to the planet's ocean by Nightcrawler and chose to stay there fighting the planet's creatures in the name of Uranus and the Eternals, as opposed to fighting her own people directly, or continuing to fight them directly. Number 10. Jean Grey was resting the whole time. After Jean Grey died as part of the Phoenix Saga, everyone was left flabbergasted. During the story, we'd seen Jean merge with the Phoenix Force, become insanely powerful, lose control over this power, become corrupted and dark, basically become a huge supervillain, and finally sacrifice herself, knowing that if she didn't, it would only end badly. Or worse than badly, because it was already pretty bad. Jean Grey, one of the original X-Men team, was dead. Or so it seemed. Later on, Marvel would want to revive the original X-Men team and bring them together on a new team and comic series called X-Factor. So Jean needed to come back to life. But hey, she was dead. So we got the added story to explain that the version of Jean that had died wasn't really her, but was a separate entity known as Phoenix. Sort of this merged thing. Wasn't really Jean. Jean herself was resting comfortably in a pod beneath the ocean, still lived, and would be able to return. Yay. Number 9. Tony Stark was adopted. Yep, that's the thing that happened. I'm just wondering if this one will show up in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I can't deny that if we get an Arno as a result, an Arno Stark, I would actually not be too upset with that, even though this retcon's pretty weird. The reason this retcon was such a terrible retcon for Tony was that his parents and their loss always remained a great catalyst and huge emotional plot point for him. Now, of course, just because he was adopted doesn't mean that he can't still love his parents as much as he did and still be as emotionally affected by their death. That's not what I'm saying. But his parents also had a naturally born son that they hid from Tony, who was born before they adopted Tony, and he also didn't know that he was even adopted. Also, there were aliens and alien tech involved in Arno's birth, which explains why this all had to be a secret, but also it's just a lot. All in all, this revelation greatly changed the way Tony saw his parents and made their relationship more complex. And I don't know if either of those things needed to happen. Number 8. Hail Hydra. One of the most shocking moments in Marvel's comic history was when it was revealed that Captain America was actually a sleeper agent for Hydra the whole time. Say what? The guy who for years was diametrically opposed to Hydra and all their beliefs, who had tried and succeeded to foil their plots countless times, was a Hydra agent? How could this be? Well, apparently all those wins were a part of his doing a very good job to convince us all and trust him so that he could stab us in the back at the right moment and take over America, becoming Hydra Supreme. Fortunately, this evil version of Captain America would later be revealed to have been created by Kobik, a living sentient version of the Cosmic Cube who was manipulated into making this retcon happen. What's more, the true Captain America still existed within the shards of the Cosmic Cube and would return once more to defeat his evil self, fixing the timeline. So, I mean, at least this retcon ended up not staying permanent, but still, it's pretty weird. Number 7. Zorn. Okay, so I was actually going to make the title of this point a little more explanatory, but then I realized how long that would actually make the title of this point. Okay, so Zorn was basically a character who showed up in the comics who was a mutant who always needed to wear a mask. Because of this, we never saw Zorn's face, leading many to wonder who was really under the mask. Although I think most people just thought, well, it's probably a new mutant because, you know, we get new mutants added to the comics every day. But no, of course, this is comics, so it had to be someone. In a dramatic twist, it was Magneto. But no, of course, this is comics, so it had to be someone that we already knew. In a dramatic twist, it was revealed to be Magneto, who had infiltrated Xavier's school in order to rally up mutant support and help him create an army. He then destroyed New York, shot Emma Frost, killed Jean, and was eventually killed by Wolverine. Later on, however, Magneto would turn up again because, well, he's Magneto, and writers wanted to inch him closer to that line between villain and anti-hero again, so they basically retconned Magneto's involvement in all of this. It turns out there was a real Zorn, and it was actually Zorn's brother impersonating Zorn, impersonating Magneto, who was really to blame. Wow. Just wow. Number 6. Ugly equals evil. That's what Thanos' retcon taught us. Yep. Thanos' backstory was added in detail in the series Thanos Rising, and what many fans were surprised to learn was that his mother was apparently driven mad by her newborn baby's hideous appearance, and because of his appearance, claimed that she needed to kill him. That's pretty terrible. She sensed basically that because he was ugly, he would also be supremely evil. And the really shocking part of this was, of course, that she was right. But also, what the heck? Just because you don't like the look of your baby doesn't mean it should deserve to die. Fortunately, a retcon was later added to fix this when it was changed to it not being the baby's appearance but to a specific deviant gene in the child's genetic code that concerned both of his parents instead. Still, not great just analyzing your baby's genes and being like, we already know you're gonna be evil, but it's better than it just being about the ugliness in appearance as the pure reason for condemnation, I guess. Number 5. Doom is never wrong. Some people like Dr. Doom a little too much. I'm probably guilty as being one of those people. To the point that they can't let him be flawed. Doom must be perfect. Well, while Doom may believe that, the reality is it's his flaws that actually help to make him such a great character, and also are important because they are a part of the reason for his villainous nature. Originally, his vendetta started against the Fantastic Four, and more specifically Reed Richards, years ago, when Reed tried to give him pointers on a device he was building. Reed warned Doom that it was unstable, but Doom didn't listen. The device ended up exploding because, well, Richards had been right, scarring Doom's face. Unable to blame himself due to his huge ego, Doom decided to blame Reed, and thus a villain was born. However, retcons have come into play a few times in regards to his origins as to whose fault the device exploding really was. In one retcon, it's actually implied that it's Mephisto's fault, but if that's true, then why has Doom hated Reed so much for pretty much forever? Another retcon implied that Ben Grimm possibly intentionally sabotaged Doom's machine, which is an even worse retcon because it makes Grimm, normally a very lovable character, look like a jerk. Both of these retcons help to buff out Doom's flaws at the expense of making his feuds illogical. Number 4. Peter and MJ's marriage never happened. During the story One More Day, Peter made a pact with Mephisto to ensure that his Aunt May would live. Part of this deal was also that people would forget Peter's secret identity, which was currently out in the open. Although it wasn't like a bargain part of the deal, it was just a thing that would happen. But what did Mephisto want in return for this? Peter to never be a hero again? Did he want his soul? No. No, 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 no. He wanted his marriage? Mephisto wanted to take Peter's marriage to MJ. And by that, I don't mean that he wanted himself to marry MJ, which would actually make, in a weird turn of events, more sense. I mean, he wanted to make it so that their marriage never existed. This was such a strange request that many were left speechless when Peter agreed and this actually happened. What was likely really going on is that Marvel no longer wanted Peter to be married. Or Joe Quesada never wanted Peter to get married in the first place. They wanted to return to the days when Peter was flying free and single, so this story happened to erase it. Number 3. Norman Osborn and Gwen Stacy's relationship. This little frightening retcon was added during the Sins Past story. It also made Peter look like an insensitive jerk, just for good measure as well. The story here that was added in was that Gwen Stacy had an affair with Norman Osborn, a man who was much older than her at the time and who would go on to be responsible for her death. This affair resulted in Gwen becoming pregnant with twins, which she secretly gave birth to. Norman then raised these children, lying to them that they were actually the children of Spider-Man and Gwen, and that Spider-Man had killed their mother, turning them into misguided villains. This was not a retcon anyone needed, but hey, it was one that we got. Number 2. Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver were never mutants. If you have been subscribers to our channel for a while, then you likely saw this one coming from a mile away. A list of the worst retcons with Amanda hosting it? I wonder what she's gonna rank high up on that list. And you were right. One of the worst retcons in mutant history for me will always be this. During the events of Axis, it was revealed that Wanda Maximoff and her brother Pyotr, Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver respectively, were never the children of Magneto, and as such, never mutants. Instead, we learned that the High Evolutionary abducted them when they were young, experimented on them, and then disguised them as mutants and returned them back to the world. Why? Well, we don't really know, which is part of the reason this is such a terrible retcon. That, and it erased years of meaningful family drama and history, and created a bunch of plot points that no longer really made any sense. Number 1. Snap Wilson. Even worse than my own personal nerd rage towards the retcon of the Maximoff twins, everyone's outrage, my own included, against this retcon. I still can't believe this was a thing that even happened in the comics. Oh my goodness. Sam Wilson in the comics became a good friend of Captain America and was even known as his ally, the superhero Falcon. However, it was revealed that Sam Wilson wasn't actually Sam Wilson, a social worker from New York with falconry skills. This was all a fabrication of the Red Skull, who had used the Cosmic Cube to turn him into the perfect partner for Captain America as part of an insidious plot. The true persona of Wilson was the criminal, thug, and pimp known as Snap Wilson. What? This would be revealed to Cap as being his true persona, which Cap would then save him from. Yikes. Fortunately, years later we would see a retcon that would basically undo this one, turning the fake persona of Sam Wilson into the real persona for him, and the originally retconned real persona of Snap Wilson into the fake, meaning that Sam Wilson was always Sam Wilson and Snap Wilson was the version created and used by Red Skull. Whew, thank goodness.
Kicking off the list at number 10, Bullseye. Daredevil. Wow, he's the coolest guy I've ever seen at a bar, hands down. So Bullseye was introduced to readers back in Daredevil 131. Now, I know he doesn't look the coolest here either, but that's who the character is, okay? Make your movie universe work for that character or just don't use the character yet. That's it. Like, you can't have Daredevil looking like this, and then when it comes to Bullseye, you have him looking like this. You can't have cool guy Colin Farrell and also leather Daredevil. It's just like, pick a lane. It looks like he's the villain of a 90s TV show, honestly. He doesn't look like the iconic evil assassin at all in this entire movie. Plus, Colin Farrell's performance is just... Now, the Batman universe did Ben Affleck a little bit better, and now we can also look forward to Colin Farrell being in the Penguin in the new Batman, so it's good. It's like you start with Marvel, move to DC, or you start to DC, and then you move to Marvel. Proper transitions. And before we head over to number 9, if you guys could go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, because it really means a lot for us at the channel, and it also helps us out as well too. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for supporting. Now back to this list. Number 9, Silver Samurai, the Wolverine. Alrighty, we got a cinematic masterpiece coming from Fox, because they just pump out the best superhero movies ever. The Silver Samurai in this movie has no mutant abilities. It's rather just an advanced tech suit. It was made up of adamantium from the orders of Ikiro Yoshida, and it was meant to prolong his life until he got Logan's healing factor. And it also looks like a Decepticon. Although it's based off of the original armor of the Silver Samurai, it just didn't work out. It was too much CGI, took you out of the movie, felt like you were watching Michael Bay's Ninja Turtles. It was just a mess. But while this Wolverine movie may be at the bottom of the list for many, I don't feel too bad for adding it in here because eventually we got around to James Mangold's Logan, which was a perfect send-off for the character. So far, there's only a couple of Fox characters that have been redeemed. Wolverine and some other mutant that I'm going to mention definitely later on in this list. Number 8, Vision, Avengers Age of Ultron. So with WandaVision episodes dropping weekly, we're getting to see Marvel have another crack at suiting up their power couple. We've seen a sneak peek now for their original comic book look that's going to come up in a future episode. Okay, cool, that's going to be amazing. So now it's only fair to revisit Marvel's first attempt at Vision. Age of Ultron was released in 2015 and comic book fans were delighted to see the creation of Vision in this movie. But unfortunately, it looked like another CGI android and not anything close to what made him pop and unique in the comics. So while some characters like Hawkeye have to look more military based because that's part of this arc for this universe that they're building all these stories in, he's more of a military character. It would make sense that he doesn't jump right into the purple onesie off the bat. But Vision could have looked anyway. He didn't have to be as grounded and realistic as Hawkeye did in the story. They could have had way more fun with him, which is something WandaVision is finally doing now. And even the solo Hawkeye show that's coming to Disney Plus is kind of leaning into more fun costume-wise. So we can look forward to seeing that in the future. See, things get better for Marvel. They start off a little bit choppy and then they're like, oh, let's throw in some purple. Let's throw in some green.
Number 7, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. These teens from Angel Grove High School are literally always wearing the color of their ranger. Like, what the hell? Can we not identify you based on your personality or voice, since for the parts of the show people care about you're wearing helmets? Sure, these teens may know martial arts, but going up against the baddies they typically end up needing to suit up and have some hilariously oversized weapon, or a Megazord. It's like they're trying to reveal their identities, and honestly, if any teen was trying to get with someone and they said, hey, I'm a superhero, they wouldn't believe it, but if they figured it out themselves, they would. Just like MJ in Far From Home. Spoilers, by the way, but it's been out for a while. When Peter tells MJ he's Spider-Man, she just laughs and says, you're screwing with me. But she believed it when she was trying to figure it out herself. Power Rangers want to be revealed for some reason, but out of costume, they're also just teens. Number 6, Iron Man. Time to get triggered beyond belief. Yes, Tony Stark is a super genius, but what about the fact that all of his super abilities, aside from intelligence, come from his suit? When not in it, sure, he may be able to call it, but if it doesn't show up in time, he's just stuck being an ordinary Joe with an arc reactor for a heart. Tony, while amazing, is just an ordinary guy who needs to see a doctor. Sorry, Tony, I love you and you may be a genius, billionaire, playboy philanthropist, but you have no regenerative abilities as far as I know, and you can be killed with a bullet. Your costume is your power, don't think too highly of yourself. Number 5, Arm Fall Off Boy. Hold on, what? This is an actual thing? Arm Fall Off Boy is able to take off his arm and beat criminals with it? Okay. Well, if you see this and he's not in costume, what do you think you're gonna do? I think run like the kid does in It, because Jesus Christ, this thing would be terrifying. This guy looks like he has a frozen ham leg for an arm like any cartoon killer ever. This honestly should not require that much explaining. This guy is literally a walking corpse in my opinion. Like, oh, you need a hand, man? Let me give you an arm. What? What? I can't. Honestly, I can't. Just go to the next number. Jesus Christ. Number 4, Mr. Immortal. Mr. Immortal is the leader and founder of the Great Lakes Avengers, for honestly no reason. His power's in his name. Mr. Immortal can't die. He discovers this after multiple suicide attempts. His real name is Craig Hollis, whose only ability is not being able to die. He has no other skills. He can't fight and is just a glorified human punching bag. He sometimes wakes up in a fit of rage after being revived, and there was only one person who could calm him down: Dinosaur, who has been described as a pterodactyl-esque hero. What the hell is going on at the Great Lakes? Jesus, pterodactyls and immortal punching bags? I mean, it would be good to train with him since he can't die, but he doesn't have any skills. They should be training him with deadly force to get this man at least basic knowledge of combat.
Number 3. Venom, Spider-Man 3. The Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies have a special place in my soul, in my heart. They're a big part of my childhood. I remember seeing Spider-Man 2 in theaters, and I remember having the best time. It rocked my world. And then the third one came out. So we got to see Venom come to life in the form of Topher Grace. This movie also just had a villain problem to begin with, not necessarily just Venom. We got a new Goblin, Harry Osborn, Flint Marko as the Sandman, and Eddie Brock as Venom. On paper, this sounds like a great Spider-Man sequel. Sounds like a lot of fun, but it wasn't. Why is that? Well, part of the problem was that the studio was pushing director Sam Raimi to include Venom in the plot, when even he didn't want to. He wanted to complete Harry's arc, boom, which he did, and he wanted to have a new wild villain that makes a blockbuster pop like Sandman, and then he originally wanted to have the Vulture in there as well as a third villain. He said Venom's lack of humanity wouldn't work with the existing story and universe. Yeah, absolutely. Venom looks bad in this movie. He just looks like Topher Grace in a suit with messed up teeth. It doesn't feel remotely close to being a powerful symbiote, and also because Raimi had to throw Venom in the plot, we also had to see a new look for Spider-Man, which was the black suit, which was cool. The black suit's a nice little nod to the old comics. It's cool, it makes him stronger. He likes the suit, it feels good on him. Awesome, we love to see it. But that meant we also got to see a new Peter Parker as well, which we didn't want to see. Number 2, Galactus. Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer. Okay, everybody heads up. We have a giant menacing space cloud coming in, and it's gonna kill all of us, so hit the deck. Galactus made his first comic book appearance in Fantastic Four issue 48 back in the 60s. He's referred to in this issue as the ultimate danger, and his looks match the description. He's the sole survivor of the 6th incarnation of the multiverse, and he was also the bad guy slash bad cloud slash thing that was coming in Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer. We're used to seeing this guy as a giant powerful cosmic being, but his big reveal in this movie was not there at all. All we got was a little sneak peek at his silhouette. But why did this happen? Why did they choose to do a giant Nimbus cloud instead of a villain? Let me explain. So 20th Century Fox, their rationale for having the character as a cloud was apparently to keep him discreet, because they had original plans for him, and that was in a Silver Surfer spin-off. So they wanted that to be a tease, and then furthermore explore his true look and story in the movie. So they wanted to kind of tease him first and then bring him in to the actual Silver Surfer spin-off, which would have been great, but we never got that. And finally, number 1, Deadpool. X-Men Origins Wolverine. Okay, possibly the worst cinematic debut of Wade Wilson. Now we're finally back on track with Wade Wilson. Just like Logan, we got that R-rated comic book character we should have always gotten. The merc with the mouth, and your plan was to sew his mouth shut. Okay, great plan. So he went from holding katanas wearing a red and black outfit to having blades in his arm while being naked. And what didn't help was the fight scene that followed this horrible reintroduction. Thank God they're trying again with these characters, but I mean, how many tickets do we have to buy to see your failed attempts?